Right, and we are live. So, first of all, can I say a warm welcome to everybody joining the stream for the next 60 minutes of hopefully very topical discussion, conversation. And as you join, I want to welcome my very special guest, Rebecca Butler. Well, you're very welcome to the stream, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. And I see we've got Tony Sahajlan from India. So hello, Tony. Nice to see you. Hi, Jed. Hello, everybody. So I thank you for having me back on, David. Really,
it's a real pleasure to see you and to spend a bit of time with you, Rebecca. So can I just say to everyone, as you're joining, make sure you retweet this. Get as many people on the stream as possible. If you're on Periscope, make sure you send hearts and super hearts, because that all counts. If you're on Facebook, then make sure that's shared as well. And if you're on YouTube, sit back and enjoy the ride for the next 60 minutes. Because sometimes when we're thinking about the things to talk about, there's not a lot of thought involved because it kind of writes itself. And that's really where we are tonight, I think, because, what I really wanted to chat to Rebecca about is the whole sort of asylum seeking issue as regards the UK. But it would be fair to say a lot of that was triggered by the events in Glasgow, which happened on Friday night. And it's strange, Rebecca, when we met to chat a week ago, if I recall rightly, we were discussing the stabbings that happened in Reading when 3 men were murdered by an asylum seeker. And here we are, a week on, and we're going to have to touch on the issue of what happened in Glasgow, where thankfully nobody was murdered, but several people were stabbed, I think some reasonably seriously. I'm not sure how you get unseriously stabbed, actually. It's strange, isn't it? The way thing kind of the way things come around. So Rebecca, let's start at the top. Let's start at the top with Glasgow, and then what we'll do is we'll dive deeper and we'll talk more broadly, because I think, folks, that some of us labour under misconceptions about the asylum-seeking system. And hopefully, Rebecca, at the end of this, nobody will be labouring under any. I see some of your comments, any illusions. But let me start off. Let me kick off at the start of this with, I'm going to share the details about what happened in Glasgow first of all, and there's 2 bits to it. So just bear with me, Rebecca, while I just get into this. So. As you know, the issue is a Sudanese asylum seeker who was shot dead by the police. The first time, I think, in many years, there's been a shooting in Scotland as he went on a knife rampage. Badreddin Abdallah Adam, catchy name, wounded 6 people, including a police officer, before he was shot dead. And then we've heard the stuff that he was suffering from mental health issues. He'd been isolated in his room. And then the curious expression, he was isolating over concerns he had coronavirus. Concerns. So I'm not sure what that means. And then, as you see, a fellow asylum seeker said apparently this resident, he thought other residents were making noise through the wall to annoy him. Now, Rebecca, before I bring you in, one other bit just to share, because this one amazed me, and it's kind of, it resonates with me for obvious reasons, as you'll see in a sec. As you see in this little screenshot here, the second point from the 2 points from the top, Adams thought that he arrived in the UK after 6 months via France. He previously stayed in Belfast, suffering from mental health issues, and was miserable. Well, I mean, I've been to Belfast. It's not that miserable, but regardless. So, I tell you, Rebecca, I've checked out the flight system. And you can't. This gentleman was Sudanese, and there's no direct flight to Belfast, alas, from Sudan. In fact, there's hardly direct flights to the UK, let alone Sudan. So I'm not sure how he managed to get himself to Belfast, and then I'm not sure how he got himself across to Scotland, given that must have happened, based on what we hear in the press, during the coronavirus lockdown. So it's a curious tale. Your thoughts, Rebecca?
Well, you're all going to see how lefty I am in the next hour. First of all, a lot of illegal immigrants into the UK are trafficked. And you and your viewers may recall back in 2015, 16, Angela Merkel opened the door to more illegal trafficking. And it's estimated that she handed 6 billion euros into the hands of the illegal traffickers. So you and I know, and we remember the Tilbury Docks scandal last year where 29 Southeast Asians were found dead in a refrigerated lorry, and 5 men are facing trial for manslaughter. They're all from Northern Ireland. So I would suspect that was an illegal trafficking. So these guys pay a lot of money to be trafficked. Now, some of them are unable to pay it up front, and they have to pay it back effectively in slavery. So if I was asked to speculate on how he got to Belfast, I would say he was illegally trafficked and he went on a lorry. Well, how did he get to Scotland? He probably did the return journey in a lorry on a Northern Ireland to Scotland freight ferry, or into Holyhead and then up to Scotland. I don't know. You have to assume that the routes into the country are not business class British Airways.
No, I think that's a fair assumption. In actual fact, Rebecca, in the Tilbury Dock situation which you outlined, the people that did that, I think they've been convicted of it, or they're certainly on trial for it anyway. They live only a couple of miles from me, actually, not very far away. And one of the issues which I don't think everyone understands is once you get onto the island of Ireland, your ability, legally or otherwise, to travel to Northern Ireland, and from Northern Ireland across to Holyhead or across to Stranraer, it's very, very easy. So you're right to highlight this, that there's a real issue there that actually is not really talked about, which surprises me, because it means that theoretically we are wide open.
We are wide open, and we are wide open to illegal trafficking. And so I think that is the headline. That's where you start the discussion, is what can you do about the illegal trafficking? It is illegal. It's not that easy to police. And the Border Force are constantly updating their methods with infrared cameras, random vehicle checks. But, people still do creep in under the illegal route. The real question, though, is what happened next. Now, under the Dublin Convention, something you highlighted, the law is, the international treaty is, that asylum should be sought at the first point of entry. So they then get refugee status in that country. One of the tests in law in the UK is, have you had your asylum claim denied in another country? And there are tests that apply to asylum seekers. So I think the simple fact is, Britain is viewed globally amongst Black, Asian, ethnic minorities as the top spot to come to. We are viewed as the most liberal, the most welcoming, the least racist. We have the best record of caring for people. And so in many ways, that makes me very proud. And it makes me very angry with race baiters. And I always say to them, if we're so goddamn awful, why are you here? And why are so many other people so keen to come here? Why don't they stay in Lampedusa? Why don't they stay off the Italian coast? Why don't they stay in the Spanish coast, with all these highly dangerous crossing points coming through Turkey and places like that?
Mm.
So these people, I don't like to other them, but these refugee seekers have been through hell to get to the UK because we offer something globally that they want to be a part of. And so I have my sympathies for them. I really, really do. So
can I push back then, Rebecca, in the interest of debate? Because I fully accept everything you've said. Perfectly reasonable. I'm not sure that sometimes these people we're necessarily getting the best of the rest of the world. Certainly when we look at the body count in the past 2 weeks, it's not been overly inspirational. But here's a question for you. And again, folks, if you pay attention to this bit, because you see, here's a simple point question. Is there such a thing as an illegal asylum seeker? Is there such a thing?
No,
there's not, is there? Look, listen to this. Listen to Rebecca, because this is fundamental, and it explains so much, and most people don't get it. Rebecca.
So an illegal immigrant is a person who has come into the country without a legitimate reason. But the people who we are now discussing are asylum seekers, therefore they are in the system and they are part of an applications process. We have something like 35 to 40,000 asylum seekers per annum. When you look at the global numbers, that is not a huge number. And was it? Oh, okay, 35. So I was close. I was
close. Yeah.
I think, so we are merely abiding by our international obligations to look after people in our global village. I'll come on to in a minute what has happened this weekend, but we are merely complying with our obligations. Now, I hope I don't go off screen, but I did a little bit of Googling earlier because I was really interested to know what UN organizations existed on human rights. And this is what I got that came up. So I looked up United Nations Human Rights Council. I'm not showing the screen. I'm just reading off my screen. Okay. And it says not to be confused with United Nations Human Rights Committee, United Nations Commission on Human Rights, or the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. So I'm looking at the United Nations Human Rights Council plus United Nations Human Rights Commission for Refugees. So we have 5 organizations funded in the billions to deal with these issues. And all of the signatories to those human rights commissions or organizations, people from their countries are seeking asylum in the West. Now, I know people think we have an overburden of asylum seekers, but actually the top 5 countries in the world who accept refugees are all in sub-Saharan Africa, because a lot of the refugees arise out of war. So we've had wars in Yemen, we've had, courtesy of the Saudis, we've had wars in Sudan, we've had wars in Somalia, we had Congo, we had the Hutus and the Tutsis.
Yeah,
Plus we have natural disasters. So the vast majority of refugees, so displaced people, end up quite close to where the war or the disaster happened, because most of them can't afford the human trafficking cost to get them to a developing nation. However, 84% of all asylum applications are granted in the developing world, not including Saudi Arabia and the Middle Eastern states. So while there were 3 million displaced people in the Syrian war, the only Middle Eastern state that took refugees was Jordan. And Jordan had a 3 million person refugee camp. Saudi Arabia took 110 people. That's it. So Saudi is currently the chair of one of the 5 UN bodies, with China on the panel. And these countries have shockingly poor records on granting asylum, on welcoming refugees, and actually people seek asylum from those countries. The point I'm making here is at the global top level, despite huge funding, the UN has failed to repair human rights.
Oh, that's right. You're absolutely right, Rebecca. The United Nations, in my view, has failed, full stop, but has failed particularly in this regard. And the ironies of some of these committees having right at the top of them people, individuals who are from countries whose citizenry is fleeing the very countries. I mean, you couldn't make it up, but that's how it operates at global level. But is this not what then causes real problems for, let's talk about Priti Patel. So she gets a lot of abuse, some of it from me actually, so hands up, for not stopping the armada that crosses the channel. But it's not as simple as that, is it? It's, you know, I think a lot of folks on this stream and who will watch this, Rebecca, will say, well, now hang on a second. We've got a tough-minded Home Secretary, very nice lady, Priti Patel. She sounds tough. And yet on her watch, as Nigel Farage frequently points out, we've got all these boats coming in, wants to come here. Very few of them ever go back. So why is it that the Home Secretary can't do anything? But she can't really do anything, can she?
Under the Touquet Accords, which were signed up by, I think, Theresa May when she was Home Sec under Cameron, that was signed with Francois Hollande, I believe. Under the Touquet Accords, they came to the agreements over Calais, Le Havre, Saint-Malo, and Caen. In terms of Britain made contributions, France made contributions to protecting those ports. But people traffickers are criminals, and they are more than capable of subverting that. And they have no compassion whatsoever about putting a group of refugees into a rubber dinghy and saying, you see the white cliffs over there, aim for that, with no care on the planet that those people are facing currents, wind, waves, and 2 major shipping lanes, one going that way and one that way. And, you know, those big cargo, those guys don't stop. It takes miles for them to stop. And those dinghies are below radar. I mean, I do a lot of sailing. I've done it. I've also sailed the Straits of Gibraltar and had persistent radio calls from Radio Tarifa saying dinghies on the Straits of Gibraltar. It's only 9 miles, okay? Our straits are, what, 20-odd miles? Only 9 miles, but the Straits of Gibraltar are lethal. And so, really, as a humanitarian, you cannot have people's lives being risked. And so what they do is, and the traffickers know exactly what they're doing, what they do is they get into the midline point, so the UN boundary, and at that point they call the UK Coast Guard, because they don't want to be in France. They want to be in the UK. Why? Because we do more for asylum seekers than other European countries. And they do not want to go back to, say, Hungary. They don't, you know, coming in through Slovenia as they were in the Syrian war. They don't want to be stuck in Malta or Lampedusa. But those countries do take asylum seekers, okay? It's the Eastern European countries that refuse to take them, because countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, Croatia, they are all fiercely anti-Muslim countries. The majority of wars on the planet are within Muslim countries. many of the refugees are Muslims, and they are simply not welcome in the state in which they arrive, whereas they are welcome in the UK.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it is a life-saving thing, and it would be wrong for Britain to say, stuff it, cross the shipping channel, because the shipping channel, half of it is in our waters, the other half is in French waters. By the way, the French do recover people from dinghies when they discover them in French waters, but I can't stress to the viewers enough, unless they've actually sailed those waters, these guys are below radar. Right?
Yeah, they can't. Yeah.
So low in the water that radars don't pick them up. So the French are not being cynical about this, I don't believe. I think the French are doing as much as we are. But you can't really get a full grip on illegal traffickers because they will risk people's lives. They don't care. And the ones that actually make it, the numbers are tiny, really tiny. And they ultimately contribute to the official asylum numbers. And if their asylum fails, and there are tests in law for their asylum claim, then they do get sent back.
What percentage would that be, would you say?
I think 80% are successful, but they have to prove various grounds in law. So, the asylum hearing needs evidence that they've been discriminated against for religion, sexual gender, their nationality, their political beliefs, their religious beliefs, things like that. And they have to demonstrate that the country that they are coming from knew that they were being persecuted and did nothing to protect them. So that's kind of the test in law. Now, one of the issues in UK law is that by the time the asylum seeker gets to the appeal tribunal, quite a few of them may have established a European Convention of Human Rights right to remain. Children may be at school, for example. Many of them, and I've dealt with these in the family courts, they claim that they have a contact arrangement with a child that is half British national. And so the courts are dealing with a variety of personal stories. There are lawyers who will very cynically charge the taxpayer-funded legal aid board to run the most ludicrous of cases. I mean, it's an industry of itself. In which they don't give a damn. Frankly, the immigration lawyers I've ever dealt with are pretty scummy, and they'll seek any loophole to subvert the system, frankly. And as I was saying last week, they're always better prepared than the Home Office lawyers. Always.
Yeah. But when you talk about the humanity of it and all of that, there's also the humanity of the fact that there does seem to be a disconcertingly large number of these individuals who, when they come here, go about the business of killing us. So, it's a balance, isn't it? I mean, I'm all for being humanitarian and all of that.
Yeah.
What I saw in Glasgow didn't look very humanitarian to me. I mean, the individual concerned from Sudan, a war-torn country, as you rightly point out, although it wasn't Britain that actually started the war in Sudan. His contribution was to end up stabbing 6 people to try and kill a police constable. And we see a lot of this, and I think that builds a lot of animosity amongst British people towards maybe more genuine, deserving cases. How do you interpret, for example, the Glasgow situation at the weekend?
Well, I mean, I just look at it from a different angle, and it's not that I maybe agree or disagree with any other analysis of it, but I think it is worth mentioning 1 or 2 facts about it. And again, as last week we were talking about the failure of the criminal system, the criminal justice system, to speak to the border force and the immigration department and the Home Office, I think people would be shocked to hear that the Home Office has contracted out accommodation of refugees from governments or from local authorities, city councils, to private companies. And one private company called Mears has got a £1.5 billion contract. One company. And Mears take the money to house and feed the asylum seekers, and they take that from the taxpayer, and the way they have treated asylum seekers is downright degrading and disgusting. Glasgow is not the first incident of Mears being complained about. In Sheffield, at the beginning of the year, Sheffield City Council and the mayor said, we are taking back control of the asylum seekers and the refugees because Mears is treating them like animals. So Mears is a private company for profit that is housing people, and they are cutting their costs as far as they can.
It was a four-star hotel, Rebecca. They weren't slum landlords, you know, 4-star. A lot of people maybe on this would think 4 stars really good for someone who actually lives here. These guys were getting it care of, well, Mears, as you say, but is 4-star not good enough?
No, it was not being run as a hotel. So as run as a hotel, I'm sure it was 4-star because it was city centre. It probably had a mini bar. It probably had all the ticks for what a 4-star hotel was. But because of the pandemic, Mears took it over and effectively leased the property, which is no different to local authorities leasing travel lodges in your local town to put the homeless people in during the pandemic. Quite right too. You know, this government caused the lockdown. This government had a responsibility to put homeless people somewhere safe in the pandemic. I know there's a bigger argument about it, but for the purposes of a pandemic, they needed a bed to sleep in, not a shop door. So Mears was not running a 4-star hotel for asylum seekers. They took them all from housing, local authority housing, and Mears took them on their contract and leased the 4-star hotel. It was not a 4-star hotel standards that those people were enjoying. The food was rotten. The food was disgusting. They were fed macaroni cheese every day. The conditions were squalid. So, you know, and the other fact was, and I think this is a disgrace, is that Mears only does accommodation. Now, this may be a failing in the contract, but asylum seekers, by the very nature of what they have been through, need support. That means not always lumping them together as a homogenous group of asylum seekers. You could have Sunni, Shia, Uyghur, Rohingya. You could have any form of Muslim in there. You could have Sudanese, Ethiopian, Yemenis, North Sudan, South Sudan. You could have every single nationality in a melting pot, children screaming in overcrowded rooms, families arguing, tribal argy-bargy going on, and all being expected to be in a pressure cooker environment eating macaroni cheese. You know, it's just a recipe for a disaster. And I think Mears, because I've looked at them today, they have a lot to answer because their duty of care is to at least provide reasonable, because we, the taxpayer, are funding it. Don't forget, 1.5 billion has gone to Mears. I think they have a bigger duty than just to lease a property and leave them to it. I really do. I feel very strongly about this.
Yeah, but the government has a duty of care. In fact, its primary responsibility is to keep the people of this country safe. And we've seen, Rebecca, in the space of 2 weeks, we've seen people losing their lives at the hands of asylum seekers. So so I accept all that you're saying about mayors. I've got no issue. I mean, this is that's a great example actually of subcontracting things out from government at hand's length, and it doesn't always work because, for the reasons you've articulated. But government's number one responsibility is to keep British people safe. They failed in Reading, they failed in Glasgow, haven't they? Government now I'm talking about.
Well, I mean, this is all part of the argument, and people are saying, is this woman sane? On the stream. I'm merely stating fact, and we have to get our heads around the fact that there are wars happening on this planet. There are natural disasters, and the countries surrounding these areas are not supporting the refugees. And it is the illegal traffickers who we should be pointing the finger at. Now, when you come on to the duty of care argument, I'm with you. But question, has and did the government delegate the duty of care to mayors in this situation?
Yep.
Because if they did delegate the duty of care, it is not simply the case that your duty of care only extends to shelter, food and water, okay? And maybe some of your viewers don't know this. Each asylum seeker gets effectively a credit card every week, and they get £37 per person to spend on a credit card. That's not very much money, and they're not allowed to work. So
it's more than they would have at home, though, isn't it? Let's be honest.
But the cost of living is about 15 times what it is in Sudan.
Yeah, but they know that before they try to get here, don't they?
Well, I know, but be that as it may, it's not as though we're giving the asylum seekers money. We're giving mayors money. We're not giving the asylum seekers money. And the other point, I know people are now questioning my sanity and how far left I'm going to go on this argument, but I do think it's really important to put the other side.
Yeah, it's fine. Let's do it. Yeah.
And it's this. Look at Sudan, okay? So, some people, some baiters might say, well, of course it's the British fault because of the Sudan war, because back in 1950, Britain said, right, there's North Sudan and South Sudan. South Sudan was aligned with Nigeria and Kenya and Tanganyika, as it then was, now Tanzania. And North was the more Muslim states aligning with, say, Egypt. Now, the problem was that the British did give more say to the Northern Sudan. They did try and join them together. What happened was that the Southern Sudan didn't really have a place at the negotiating table. And then the North Sudanese government tried to impose Sharia law on the South. The South was a hell of a lot more liberal, more like Kenya and Tanzania. Okay, you wouldn't go to Sudan. You would go to Kenya if you're a British tourist. There's nowhere to go in Sudan, okay? Because the war has been a cultural, ethnic war about Sharia law.
Absolutely, yeah. That's what's happening in Sudan, yeah. But I'm not sure what happened in 1950 is relevant in 2020.
I agree.
Regarding those people fleeing. I mean, there's historical context, and it's good to know historical context.
Let me tell you why we need to consider what our duty of care extends to. Because 29,000 children are forced into the Sudanese army. So that is divide it in half, that is putting 15,000 boys with Kalashnikovs and machetes, which is the weapon of choice in African states. They're given Kalashnikovs and machetes and said, told, go and kill that person over there at the age of 10. And the girls at the age of 10 are being forced as wives, soldiers' wives. So 30,000 children a year are put into that situation. Now, I'm speaking generally and not about the specific case of what happened in Glasgow. But the duty of care has got to extend to finding out what the backstory is of the people coming over. Because if somebody from Sudan was carrying a Kalashnikov and a machete at the age of 10, as sure as God made little apples, they're not going to be right in the head. The level of emotional damage on kids who go through these war-torn countries is astronomical, and it's at levels that none of us can comprehend.
Well, we've seen, Rebecca. Yeah, I mean, we've seen this what I call machete culture. It's now become part and parcel of life in the UK, which is profoundly disturbing. Because if you want to talk about societies like Sudan or Somalia or whatnot, I mean, there's a lot of barbarism, and it starts very young, as you say, in those countries. The difficulty I think that I have is I think we're importing that. And the body count reflects that. And there's not a week goes by, where take London, for example. There's not, I mean, we see all these scenes of mobs chasing other people with machetes. And it didn't used to be like this. And so some people would say, well, what the UK has done is, and it's a point of view. When you import the third world, you become like the third world. So hence machetes and all the unfortunate, awful violence that accompanies it. So, how do you feel about that aspect of it? The fact that we're making our society more violent because of our duty of care.
Well, I went to Ghana last year, and it was the first time I sort of been to a sort of sub-Saharan, the equatorial part of Africa. And pretty much, because it's quite tribal and it's very rural. And we went on a very, very long trek one day, and every single African male I saw was carrying a machete. Yeah. It is very much. It's not an instrument of barbarism. It's used for farming.
Not there. It's not. Not there. It's not.
So I mean, the question here is, because of, if I may say, politicians like Dawn Butler and Diane Abbott, who refuse to allow the police to stop and search because they are racist, and because they refuse to address the knife culture in their own communities, despite what the mothers of knife victims are saying in those communities. But because politically they're all too fanny-ish to do anything about stop and search. Sadiq Khan is a out-and-out weasel on stop and search.
Yeah,
we are going to have knives people are going to carry knives in city centres.
Well, Rebecca, sorry to interrupt, Rebecca, but it's something you tweeted. I noticed you tweeted this a couple of days back, and you said, we're either going to have much more stop and search, or we're going to have to move to an armed police force. I think more or less. You said that, and that's really the point I think you're elaborating on a little bit there, because if we don't remove the machete culture, the gang culture, the savage culture, then it just poisons everything, doesn't it? And you will end up with police having to shoot. And we probably disagree on this one actually, but if you don't want to have an armed police force, and that's a reasonable point of view, like the States, and we've seen things in the States in the last 3 or 4 weeks where people have been, George Floyd being but one instance, where armed police for whatever reasons have ended up shooting people, and it's never a happy result, no matter how you look at it. But we're heading towards that if these weasels like Butler and Khan and the rest of them don't address the issue. But I don't see any evidence of them remotely wanting to address the issue. So where does your dichotomy fall down around that one?
Well, it's not as though the Black community don't want stop and search, because they do. They want to stop their children being killed by other children. And ironically, Glasgow was a shining example of how you reduce knife possession in teenagers. Glasgow had an amnesty on knives and about 5 years ago, and they went from the highest to the lowest in the nation. So it is ironic that this should have happened in Glasgow for that very reason. So it is, it's not the Black community, and something I keep banging on about with Black commentators on Twitter, Facebook, all social media platforms, the media, is they do not speak when they open their mouths. They do not speak for the Black community. They want to patronize from their super privileged position of having been privately school educated and calling us all racist because they got nothing better to do. You listen to people like Trevor Phillips and Doreen Lawrence, and they say we need to stop Black teenagers killing Black teenagers. Black is killing Black, and the communities know this. The community leaders know this. The youth center, the people who run the youth centers, they know it. So we just need to shut the politicians up and get Priti Patel to reinstate stop and search. The end of discussion. Otherwise, it's going to be a shit show. Seriously.
Well, you're absolutely right. And again, I think this is where we all have common ground in this one. I think everybody on this stream, and you, Rebecca, and myself, we passionately believe that in the rule of law, and the rule of law must be seen to prevail. And what's most deplorable about what goes on at the moment is we have on these, and we see it in the States as well as here in the UK, we have these, politicians, preening, posturing politicians, and they actually, and it's disgusting really, they will use the Black community and the terrible things that affect that community for political advantage. It's naked, it's obvious that this is what they do. And so it's a contemptible disregard for the very community that they actually front up. And, so that makes it hard for, I guess, the government. But at the same time, we have a government with a majority. Priti Patel does talk tough. Do you think that there will be an extension of stop and search into the Black communities to help the Black communities? Or with Black Lives Matters now being such a thing, is that going to hinder and sort of make that more difficult? What do you think?
I think really that the government has got to stop behaving like sixth formers and stop responding to what they think tomorrow's headline is going to be, what the clickbait is going to be. I keep saying this. They have to get out there and say, stop and search works. And we know it works. The evidence is there that it works. We need amnesties. We need youth workers. We need the communities in which the Black in which the knives are held. We need them to get in there and get rid of the knives. We need to convince children that having a knife does not defend you better from somebody who has a knife. Because if you have one with a knife and one without, you're less likely to be injured than if you both have a knife.
That makes sense.
Common sense things. And unless we open dialogue, this is going to get worse. Okay? Kids are going to go through scanners at school. Effectively, we're going to have police blocks where you all have to walk through a X-ray arch. That's what's going to happen if we don't get knives off the streets. Yeah,
and actually, Rebecca, we're not too far away from that. Doesn't seem implausible to me that could happen. But I think that all that does is it makes our culture more barbaric. It takes away so much of the kind of the tolerance. If you like, the general pluralism that we want to have in this country, because ultimately we're being forced to get a situation where if you want to protect your kids, then at school, then you got to put an arch in, a security arch, lest someone comes in with a machete to do a bit of tribal justice. So it's very difficult. And then another aspect of it all is this: And you made it. I mean, I've seen some of the comments on the stream, and I'm not sure if everyone agrees with you, Rebecca. But then, frankly, they don't always agree with me either. But you know, generalization is a very dangerous thing. You shouldn't generalize about anything. I took part on a stream yesterday where we were talking about, you know, China, and we should differentiate between the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese people. They're not the same, and it's the same when it comes to this area as well. You know, not everyone wanting to come to our country is a problem by any means. But some are, and we have to be clear in that. And and we need to be robust, and we need to make sure that we do enforce our laws. And people understand, Rebecca. The other thing is that, you know, if you come here, you've got to be prepared to accept our laws, you know, our rules, or else why are you here? And that's a problem, isn't it? Because a lot of people perceive that these people can come here, they don't have to obey any of our laws, they don't really care, and that's okay. What do you think?
I think that it does not typify the asylum seeker or the you know, the Syrian teacher who's run from Idlib to get away from the bombing and has walked through the winter through Europe to come to the UK because actually they can speak English. That's the other thing, by the way. In most of these countries, their language is English, so they see England as the obvious place to come because of language.
Well, who would want to settle in Germany? I mean, I'm not sure if you speak German or not, but what a language! What a language! Yeah.
Exactly, or one of the or Slavic or Nordic.
Yeah,
Sweden has a lot of refugees, but I mean, I would like to make another point: is that, you know, all of us associate places like Dijon in France for mustard and a nice drop of Burgundy from the Côte de Beaune village. In Dijon last week, there were Chechens fighting North Africans through the streets of Dijon, which if none of your viewers have been there, it's a very beautiful town. Not that that's relevant to the argument. Chechens versus North Africans. Chechens being predominantly Muslims, but the North Africans don't tolerate their style of Islam because it's different to theirs. So they were running through Dijon with Kalashnikovs and machetes. Now, really, we don't have a gun problem because getting a Kalashnikov into Britain is actually very hard because of the crossings. You wouldn't really manage to get a Kalashnikov on a dinghy because the Coast Guard's not going to let you bring it in. Okay, so Europe has a big problem with machine guns, a huge problem, because they come in. So end of freedom of movement is a good thing for that, because I see a situation where that could happen in time.
I completely agree. And again, this is where I think we do have common ground, because it is the freedom of movement, given what is happening in Europe. And you mentioned, you know, Dijon, but there are, as you would probably know better than me, even Rebecca, there are many other French cities that have got huge issues caused by competing groups who have come into France. They're armed to the teeth. There's extreme, unbelievable violence, actually, they use against each other. And we have been spared a lot of that by definition of the fact that, you know, they've got to get across the water before they come in here.
Well, look at our colonial obligations. I mean, you know, let's be really frank here. Jamaicans or Libyans or Algerians, right?
Yeah.
Which would you choose? Personally, I'm for the Jamaicans because they're into rum and just being nice people. North Africa is an ex-French colony, and it is violent and it is war-torn, and there are generations of hatred and violence, and they are predominantly where the terrorists are recruited. Where would I prefer my immigrants to come from? I would prefer them actually from sub-Saharan Africa. I prefer them from the Caribbean. I'd like to see them coming from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and China and Southeast Asia. This is where I would like my immigrants to come from because I feel safer with it. And by the way, you can't discriminate with your asylum seekers, okay? So I can see people saying, do we really need them? Well, look at the Syrian teachers or scientists. Look at the Iraqi scientists and doctors and nurses and, and academics. And look at the contribution those people have made to society. So because there are so many good people that come across, I think that the 1.5 billion that went to scumbags like Mears, some of that should be allocated to psychiatric screening of all of them. Just assess them properly medically, because all of the cases, we know that they are known. We hear known to MI5, but in the subtext, also known to the mental health services. Also, people raise that young guy, Jonty, I can't remember his surname. He was 17 when he threw that little boy off the top. The flag was up on him. Why aren't the people who are being warned of mental health, like the Libyan boy in Reading, this Sudanese boy in Glasgow, the guy who, the narwhal tusk on London Bridge, I can't even remember his name. The guy who shot the police officer, stabbed the police officer at Westminster, they are all known to the mental health services. So don't tell me about MI5 watch list. What about mental health watch list? What about social workers? 1.5 billion is available for accommodation. We have to protect our nationals. The government has a duty to protect all of us, including the asylum seekers. So bloody well get them psychiatrically assessed if they've come from Sudan and are 25 years old. They are bound to have been involved in serious.
I accept that. Okay, so you asked me a question, and I'm gonna answer you now. So you said, where do I want my these immigrants to come from? Which part of the world? And the answer is, I want people to come here from whichever part of the world where they will make a difference and enhance the United Kingdom by contributing to the United Kingdom economy. Now, a great example of that, Rebecca, which you and I know both have a love for, is Indian people. Many Indian people, I think somebody flashed up the number, but we've got a significant Indian community. And they've come here. They're peaceful people. They're productive people. They integrate in British society. I reckon that there's a great template model of a people who, when they come to a country like the UK, make an amazing contribution. So that's my generic answer. I don't really care where you come from. I care about you as an individual. Are you prepared? Can you make a difference to the United Kingdom? And I'm going to be blunt about it. Do I think Somalis, in the general, not in the individual, but in the general, do I think Somalis make a huge contribution? No, I really don't. Do I think Sudanese do? In the main, not in the individual exceptionality. No, I don't necessarily think they do. That's not to say that we shouldn't welcome people from wherever. I don't believe in that kind of mindset. But I do think the priority is this country. It's the people of this country that there is such a duty to protect. And I think government has failed. You've mentioned the mental health people. They've failed. MI5, they've failed. But hey, listen, they've got a hell of a job. I get criticized for saying this, but I don't blame them, because how do you watch, what is it, 30,000, 40, I don't know how many thousands, tens of thousands of people. Back at the height of the IRA campaign, they had about 300 people, and that kept the house, rocking for quite a few decades. 23,000, how do you do that? But it is always the same, Rebecca. It's almost template, isn't it? If one of these events happens, the first thing we find very shortly is they were known to the security forces and mental health. It is remarkable, isn't it? But I think some people might take a view, but the mental health issues, what constitutes mental health issues? Is it just an inability to comprehend you're in a different country and you have to accept the tradition of that culture. Let's chat about that. What do you think is I'm not saying you're a mental health expert, but what do you think it is?
I actually think that the boys, and it is always boys, men, should all be screened for post-traumatic stress disorder. If I was in charge, they would all be screened. So you're not getting your accommodation, you're not getting your card, you have to be screened properly. You have to be health screened. Particularly coming from sub-Saharan Africa, you got to give a blood test and a chest x-ray to make sure you haven't got TB and you haven't got AIDS. And if you have, we'll treat you. Because we are a first world wealthy country, we will treat you. But we treat mental health so badly. We do not treat our own patients well in mental health. Our mental health provision is shockingly, shockingly, shockingly poor. We released prisoners with poor mental health. There were all the signs with the Reading stabbing, all the signs there that this guy was going to cause problems. Okay, his backstory didn't check out, so somebody should have got him and said, why are you saying this? Because your parents don't agree with your backstory.
That's right.
Query. Did he have auditory hallucinations? Yes, it sounds as though he did. Was he screened for schizophrenia? The guy up in Glasgow, there were warning signals. Nobody did anything. Nobody did anything because the people in charge are property developers. They are not properly trained sort of public sector workers who are there to look after people's welfare. And if you look after their welfare, you protect the rest of society. Because if he had been assessed by a CPN, he'd be under the Mental Health Act now, and he would never have attacked those people. That's a fact.
Yeah, but you see, when they have, but in some cases they have been at least identified, known to the mental health authorities, which is the public sector. So how come nothing was done?
That's the question, isn't it? That is the question. Yeah. Why was nothing done to stop that schizophrenic teenager throwing the little French boy off the boat? Huge numbers of risk factors identified. He said he was going to do it. I once represented a client who slashed his ex with a Stanley knife in front of the children, having said he was going to do it to the social workers. It's incompetent organizations. They're incompetent. I mean,
that is my view, is that the private sector, as in this instance that you've mentioned with mayors, is obviously lacking in many ways, but so is the state sector as well. And ultimately, again, what's bad about it is that the people who suffer, or like the Scottish police officer, the guys in the park in Reading, ordinary are the people on London Bridge, the people in Manchester Arena. The ordinary people suffer and lose their lives as a consequence of what I see as systemic failure. And the difficulty is, Rebecca, I don't really see how we fix this one unless there's a massive political will. And I'm not able to see that, if I'm honest. Can you see a political will to really get to grips with it?
I still see political blindness. And honestly, I've always viewed that the biggest problems have simple solutions. But government is blind. Civil servants, what are they after? They're after a gong. So the fewer waves, the better. Like Sir Mark Sidwell, when you or I get sacked, we get sacked, but he just gets given another equally peachy job. Plus, he's got a gong and is in the House of Lords. I mean, well done you, Mark Sidwell. But that's another topic for another day. The civil service is incompetent. There's no accountability. Political accountability it isn't there. And so heads should roll. I would like to see mayors punished for this. I really, really would. And I would like to see the social services punished for that little French boy being paralyzed for life. I'd like to see people punished for professionals not listening to the psychiatric cues. I really, really would. And I just feel, no, people are angry with what I'm saying on the stream, but if we are to protect society properly, we are not going to achieve it by becoming like Saudi Arabia and saying, no, we don't take refugees, we're not interested. We are not that native in our thinking. We are not that basic and inhumane. We say, we take you, but if we take you, we have a duty to make sure you're okay. And if you're not okay, we'll treat you. But these are untreated people who have witnessed horrendous things in childhood.
But okay, and again, those are reasonable points. There's one thing that I can remember happening in the channel. Do you remember there was at least one incident where a boat was crossing and they had Syrian refugees who may well indeed have been Syrian refugees. There's always that outside possibility. Anyway, it was reported at the time that some of the maybe I've got it wrong. No, I've got it wrong. They were crossing the Mediterranean. And what happened was from North Africa, and the Muslim people in the boat threw the Christians overboard to drown. Such was the tolerance. And yet, you know, the people who made that crossing, the Muslims who survived in the crossing to the Med and who were then on mainland European soil, those are the sort of people, and I'm really thinking, I'm really not sure that you are here to make a great contribution if you're literally throwing Christians overboard as you come to the, theoretically Christian country. You know, I mean, I find those things really problematical. But Rebecca, the reality is we've come to the end of our hour. And one thing I've noticed comments here tonight. Now, here's something I wanted to say. I don't want to have a little echo chamber where everybody agrees with everybody. So Rebecca should be congratulated for putting forward robustly her views, and people should respect them. You don't have to agree with them no more than you have to agree with me. You don't have to, in fact, agree with me at all if you don't want. But it's good to have, this is what makes this country great, folks. It's about civilized debate. It's about trying to understand there's different ways of looking at things, you know, and this, Rebecca, is it's a complicated subject, and so I wanted to thank you for sharing dimensions to it that people don't understand. Priti Patel can't turn them around in the next boat. She can't do that, folks. Though I might want her to do that, she can't. It's never going to happen. And there is the awful people smuggling issue, and there is the issue of the channel and all that goes on around that, and then what happens when people come here. So we've had an hour on it, Rebecca. I think we're just getting warmed up, really, but unfortunately, an hour is all we have.
Amazing comments. I mean, I just see somebody saying, I can't even get to see a doctor at the moment, but Rebecca wants the immigrants. I want everybody to have it. I want to protect everybody, and I have to take a pragmatic view and look at what the problems are and deal with it from a problem-solving approach rather than a political blind approach, which is do nothing. Because the minute you do something, then clickbait starts and they're terrified of what the media headline's going to be. I want our politicians to take responsibility for stuff, and I want them to be strong and stop behaving like sixth formers. That's what I want, really.
I wanted to deal with this comment. Priti Patel is British. In fact, she's amongst the best of British, and she has every stake in this country. So, you know, I'm sorry to whoever said that, but you're absolutely wrong. Britain is better than this, folks. Yes, we can be very critical, and I'm savagely critical in some instances, but by the same token, saying something about like that with Priti Patel, you're wrong. You couldn't be further wrong. And if you think like that, frankly, you need to listen to Rebecca and myself maybe a bit more. There's lots of patriots in the government. Yes, Rebecca makes a crucial point. She and I talk about it often. The fact that government plays to clickbait, meaning tomorrow's headlines, in the BBC, Sky, and all that. They're terrible for doing that, and it means that strategic direction is lost because. And I think, well, it's another conversation. But look at the coronavirus experience. I mean, my God, could there have been a worse instance of clickbait has damaged this country in a way that arguably the Luftwaffe didn't actually do. So,
And Macron, though, if you look at what's going on in France, Macron has been playing to clickbait as well. And, just like we ended up with the Black Lives Matter, and 125 police officers in the last 4 weeks have been injured through illegal protesting, you've got people rampaging through Dijon, known for its mustard, with Kalashnikovs and machetes. Because, and actually, just on a final point, I know we've run out of time, we are currently looking at the perfect storm for a third world war. That is what we're looking at. We have got problems with China. I haven't had a moment to talk about Turkey's invasion of Kurdistan today. The scenes of violence against the Kurds is horrendous. We've got problems with the Palestinians and the Israelis behaving like attack dogs. We have got so many problems in the world. We are facing a huge, huge recession. We are looking at a perfect storm. And so, I think these stories are going to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And I do think accountability in politics, from whatever ministry it is the most important thing. Stop playing to the media. Start making decisions, particularly with an 80-seat majority.
That's the thing. It's almost like Boris has forgotten that he won a very impressive victory, which provides the political muscle just to do stuff. It doesn't matter if the bloody BBC don't like it. It doesn't matter if Sky have a hissy fit. It's irrelevant. Do the right thing, because the one lesson in life I've learned is if you try to do the right thing, you'll go further than if you're sort of weaselly about it and only go a bit of the way because somebody mightn't like it. Just do what I think most people want to see. People want to see a fair country where British people are protected, where we are humanitarian, reasonable, how we deal with other people from other places. That's what we want to see. We want to have safe streets, safe cities. We want young people to be able to go out, young coloured people to go out and play without getting involved in gangs and all the stuff that goes on, And so there's a clear narrative which government really needs to address. But we've had our chance to address it, Rebecca. We've shot over the time, but listen, a really big thank you to you for being here. Thanks to everybody who's been on the stream, folks. Back again on Wednesday night, and I'll speak with you then. In the meantime, thanks for all your time and your comments. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.